Good morning, everyone. My name is Germaine Noonan and I'm Head of Education here at Business in the Community Ireland. I would like to welcome each of you here this morning. I hope you've survived Storm Ellen overnight, and I'm hoping that the next hour can be a bit of a refuge for those of you joining us from the Irish coastline and the worst affected counties. It's also been a difficult week for everyone after Tuesday's government announcement, but I was glad to hear the leader of the Green Party, Eamon Ryan, yesterday acknowledge that it may appear that there are conflicting approaches in their decision, with around 6 in households and at the same time hundreds gathering in schools. But the important thing that he emphasised was that the priority for Ireland is to reopen our schools and get children back with their peers and to their education. It's great to be joined by so many leaders here today from our member companies and from businesses who participate in our education programmes. So I'll start with a few housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded and we'd really welcome questions, so please submit them. Or if you've any technical issues, let us know. We're active this morning on social media and the details are there on the screen for you now. So I'll move on to our agenda, and we are going to update you on our programme plans, and I'll do that shortly. And then I'm really excited about our panel discussion, which is going to showcase the impact of the school shutdown on children, on their families and the schools, and what we really need to do to address that as best we can. So it's our privilege to be joined by the well-known ESRI researcher, Dr. Emer Smith, and TUSLA's Director of Education Support Services, Noel Kelly, and a teacher from Sligo, Dermot Casey from Summerhill College. Following the panel discussion, we'll address any questions that you may have. And then to conclude the morning, I do have an important call to action. So I'd like to start off by going back to March, when the schools shut down. And it was done with such a suddenness and a swiftness throughout the country. That government decision threw all families and their children and teenagers into uncharted territory. But since then, our team have been working in a very focused way to see how best we would adapt and pivot our programmes and school supports to ensure that along with you all, we would respond effectively. And just to recap, in April, we were in touch with all our companies to see how they might be able to provide some help. And you really responded immediately, and it was really heartening. Many of you provided food, laptops, even money, and many supports to your partnering schools. A number of our member companies launched nationwide supports around technology, online learning, virtual volunteering, and even practical supports like printing materials to assist their partnering school who had been in need. I want to say a real thank you from all of us here for what you did, because at the same time, your own businesses have been thrown into uncharted waters regarding your own business activity, and most of all, caring for your own employees. Then in May, we held a webinar on education in a time of crisis, just to communicate with you what it was like on the ground at that time for families, for teachers and schools. And we heard a heart-wrenching story about food support for families in poverty from a Dublin principal. And then the renowned psychologist David Coleman provided reassurance around understanding what the real priorities were for parents in order to reduce high levels of anxiety amongst young people. In June, we held 6 stakeholder meetings with experts, school principals, teachers and businesses to gain an accurate insight into how they were actually operating. And also, we wanted to hear their plans on reopening, and most of all, get their suggestions and advice on how our programmes might operate in the coming academic year. And it was those meetings that provided the groundwork for our plans. Then in July, we contacted the CEOs of all our participating companies to thank them for the work that you lead on the ground in your businesses. And I also had a call to action for them if it was possible. You know, the responses were so positive. They were full of intent, and they said they would do all they could to support their school. Do you know, we have great business leaders in Ireland. At the end of July, our own education team met to consider all we had gathered, and we reflected further. This month, we have conducted further meetings to refine the draft plans, and they have been invaluable. In particular, because as you well know, the landscape is changing so fast for us all. Thankfully, we are now at a point where we feel the plans are 95% there. So what I'd like to do is take you through the 4 main programs that are for students, and this will hopefully paint a picture of how we see them operating. So I'll start with our 2 primary programs. The first is Time to Read. So you'll be glad to hear that we are going to take a local, flexible approach. It will all be about what works best for you, your company, and your employees. At the moment, we have 45 Time to Read partnerships throughout the country. So what we plan to do is reduce the normal 20-week programme to 12 to 16 weeks. And we have a number of options. It can be in person, it can be virtual, or it can be a blended approach. We will operate on whatever platform works for you and your partnering school. And of course, fundamental is your own health and safety protocols and the guidelines for public safety. The reason we're putting down blended options and an option for in-person is that we've been hearing over the last few months from principals and teachers that they are actually really hoping it would be possible, if they have physical space in their building, to have readers in, because they have said there's such a need for children now to have that interaction, not only with their classmates, but with volunteer readers, because it really brings joy to the children. Now, we recognise this may or may not be possible for companies and their staff, and so we are going to have a virtual version which will be somewhat like a book club, where 2 volunteers will read with 2 children. It's important to note that parents will be very much brought on board in terms of permission. That's always our approach here at Business in the Community, and it will be vital in a virtual world. We do anticipate that September and early October is going to be a time of real adjustment for schools and their children. There'll be a focus on supporting child well-being and adapting to the new measures, and that will be important to consider. So we see it'll be closer to midterm when Time to Read will commence. And again, I want to say it's important to know it will be a local, flexible approach, what works best for you and the school. You'll be delighted to know that the Garda vetting should be easier because it will be electronic, and the volunteer training will take place in a virtual setting also. Moving on to Time to Count. There's no doubt that this programme is our most difficult one to pivot to a virtual world. However, with your help, we know it's possible, and we've been working very hard on it. It will maintain a 10-week programme. A number of the programmes had kicked off in springtime before schools closed, and many were about to kick off. So this programme had been an in-classroom, in groups between volunteers and children. So obviously that is most unlikely. So it will be either outdoors, that's a real option, where there is space in the local school to do that. Perhaps in some cases, something can be done in the school building if they have the space to facilitate such. So it will be a blended approach, again, based on what works best for you, your business. Now, the content is obviously going to have to change. So it can't be maths games. However, based on our stakeholder inputs, it will focus on the practical application of maths in the workplace, the home, and in the outdoors. And like Time to Read, it will also be virtual volunteer training and electronic Garda vetting. So moving on to our post-primary programmes, mentoring being the first one. Mentoring is provided to senior cycle students as a way of support. They meet for an hour every 3 weeks. We've decided that in a response to the identified need that has been articulated throughout the summer, there is such a need for mentoring in schools. Senior cycle students who have missed 5th year since March, coming back to face a leaving cert, these students have been identified by experts and school leaders as being of critical importance, because they've lost a lot of learning and in-school time. So we're seeking more businesses to consider mentoring. And the great thing is we're going to offer a 1 or a 2 year option. 1 year to support those leaving certs, and then the traditional 2-year programme to commence supporting fifth years. As you've probably read yourself, the levels of isolation and disengagement have been quite stark, and in particular in the schools that you work with. We've also been hearing from heads of human resources and our own education task force that this will be a great opportunity for employees to actually discuss and share with students how they themselves have had to adjust in their workplaces, and how this is what is needed in a situation such as this when a pandemic presents. So you can consider a 1 year or 2 year programme based on what you and your school decide to do. And if it's a 1 year programme, then you're going to be providing immense support to the leaving certs. It can also be blended or virtual. There has been an expression from school leaders that it would be great to kick off within social distancing guidelines to actually meet in person if the space is there, just to break down barriers. You know what it's like when you're meeting a stranger for the first time, and to be endeavouring to go into mentoring online, that will be a challenge. So if that's possible, great. We also hope that by springtime, things will have improved and a site visit will be possible. Now, importantly, as a result of the stakeholder meetings, more structure will be required for mentoring. So we will provide that and the resources to you. And you can see there on the slide the main content areas that have been deemed to be most relevant and valuable. It's important to realise that mentoring is at its most impactful when there is actually no structure. Now, it's quite a skill to let the student lead the conversation, as many of you who have mentored will know, and to be able to engage in that way. But research does demonstrate that it actually brings the best outcomes. However, in a virtual world, that will be more than challenging. So therefore, we have a lot of structure available for those who will be mentoring. At this point, I'd like to say a thank you to Basis Point. The Basis Point Foundation have provided us with funds to expand this programme throughout Ireland. In particular, we're looking at Dublin, Cork and Limerick, or anywhere that the funds industry is located. We're really interested in hearing from companies in the professional services industry. And I know Sinead Culreevy and Noel White from Basis Point are joining us here this morning, and business in the community would like to acknowledge your generous support, so thank you. And finally, our last programme is Skills at Work, and it is the programme that most of you joining us this morning participate in. Now, we are announcing a very positive and exciting change to this programme. It will move from being a senior cycle programme to a second year programme this autumn. The decision has come about after 2 years of work, considering many reports and research from the ESRI, the Educational Research Centre, the OECD, EU, and countries like Australia and the UK. All of the evidence points to the urgent need to bring the world of work to younger students. And the reasons for this are plentyfold. For example, according to an ESRI report by Emer Smith and Selena McCoy in 2011, it is around the age of 14 that students disengage in school. Growing up in Ireland, the longitudinal study that the ESRI and DCYA are conducting, they found that most 20-year-olds were positive about their second level education in Ireland, but many highlighted a lack of preparation for the world of work and adult life. And 2 years ago, the OECD had a study, and in it they found that career talks is associated with significantly better earnings at the age of 26. The wage premium was found to be at its greatest where students took part in more than 5 career talks at the age of 14 to 15 rather than 15 to 16 years of age. That's worth bearing in mind. And last year, as many of you know, we had a pilot with 11 partnerships. Some of you participated, and we did a version of Skills at Work with second years in those 11 schools. Now, the pilot's evaluation has indicated, we're delighted to say, strong outcomes particularly around engaging students. So that's good news. It also demonstrated that students gained an early understanding of the importance of their education, and it opened their minds to the many careers early in their second level schooling in order to support them achieve their potential. After all, it's all about the long-term outcomes. And just lastly, beyond our own shores, the Australian Ministry of Education has stated that when a broad range of career awareness activities are extended to primary and early secondary school years, it can help to lift aspirations and extend the range of career possibilities, particularly for students at risk of disengagement. And it can also stop students ruling out options for themselves at a young age. So those are the key reasons for this move. You'll be delighted to know that core content will still remain, and you're very familiar with that. The day in the life, the intro session and the site visit. But there will be options such as presentation, communication skills, personal branding, and these all link in with the new junior cycle. So it's a very exciting recalibration of the Skills at Work programme. It will bring great outcomes, in particular for our marginalised young people who have many talents that this country urgently needs in order to ensure that we have a rich and inclusive society and an effective economy. So now I'll segue to our guest panel, and I'll invite Emer, Dervla and Noel to turn on their cameras and their microphones. I'm delighted to introduce firstly Dr. Emer Smith, who's the Research Professor at the ESRI. Emer's co-principal of Growing Up in Ireland, and she's Joint Research Area Coordinator for Education. Her main interests centre on education, school to work transitions, gender and comparative methodology. Educational inequality has been an important focus of Emer's research, reviewing the school completion programme and evaluating DESH. And Emer is also currently co-director of the UK-based Understanding Inequalities project. And we're very delighted to know that in her spare time, Emer sits on our education steering group. So you're most welcome, Emer.
Thank you very
Together
much.
With Emer,
good morning.
Good morning. Together with Emer, we have Noel Kelly, Director of TUSLA's Education Support Service, TESS as it's commonly known. This is made up of the School Completion Programme, Homeschool Community Liaison and Educational Welfare Services. Prior to that role, Noel was manager of the Northside Partnership for many years, and before that he was a primary teacher in Darndale in Dublin. He had a very successful and internationally acclaimed parent mentoring programme in Darndale called Preparing for Life. That was the brainchild of Noel. And Noel was convinced that reaching children from the earliest possible stage is key to boosting their future engagement in school. You're welcome, Noel.
Good morning, Germaine, and good morning, everybody.
Thanks, Noel. Our third panellist, Dervla Casely, has swiftly joined us from her early morning NCT test in Sligo. Delighted to report that she passed, or rather her car passed. Dervla is a business teacher going into her 17th year in Summerhill College in Sligo and spent some time in Presentation College in Athenry. She also worked, very excitingly, in the marketing department at Universal Studios in Hollywood, specifically on movie premieres prior to teaching. Her main role now is teaching enterprise to students to provide them with a very early introduction to the world of work. And as you say, Dervla, it instills an ambition in them to become the nation's aspiring future entrepreneurs. Dervla has led school teams to numerous Irish and European titles in the world of finance and enterprise over the years. So you're all very welcome.
Thank you, Germaine.
It's great to have you. Thankfully, Storm Ellen didn't knock you out for us this morning. So Emer, can you set the scene for our audience this morning in terms of what you know has been the reality for children and their families in Ireland since our schools closed down in March?
Well, we've seen an unprecedented period of school closure, and that's really served to expose and reinforcing existing inequalities. So what we've seen is that children and young people have differed in their access to resources, so digital resources, but also the kinds of insider knowledge on the part of parents around the curriculum, around teaching methodologies. So in Ireland and elsewhere, available evidence would show that inequalities have grown over the period of school closures, and Irish evidence would show that disengagement has been much greater in DEIS schools than in other school contexts, partly because of lack of digital resources, less access to private spaces to study, and because parents may have less knowledge of the curriculum and may have less experience of the educational system themselves. Now, at the moment, we have, quite properly spent a lot of time talking about how we get people back into the classroom safely in terms of social distancing, hygiene, and so on. But I think we've spent much less time and was given much less attention to how we try to make up that gap in learning, that learning loss when children and young people are back in the classroom. And I think that's actually key, because Ireland has done really well over the last few years in terms of keeping young people to the end of senior cycle. But I think there's a real risk that some of those young people who disengaged partially or more or less completely from learning during lockdown, and that they won't reappear in our education system. And that's a real risk. And there's a risk that young people will struggle academically when they're back in the classroom because of that gap and the fact that they may have not been participating in the kind of reading activities and other cultural activities that would support their learning. So I think we need to be looking at intensive supports for those groups, which has implications for business and community as well as other provision. And we also can't separate out the educational from the broader well-being and development. We know from surveys of adults in Ireland that there's been very significant depression, anxiety associated with the pandemic and the associated restrictions. That's been greater for younger people, so we would expect that to be the case for children and young people. And we would also expect them to be impacted by their parental stress and the stress of job loss, as well as broader anxiety. So I think there are considerable challenges for us in getting children back into the classroom in that broader holistic sense. But I think business and community can play an important role in re-engaging those young people.
Thank you, Emer. It certainly is, it's a challenging picture. Now, in addressing the challenge, I might turn to Noel, because Noel, your school completion and your homeschool community liaison personnel have been responding since March immediately. Can you tell us and share with the audience here what your priorities will be when the schools reopen in 2 weeks' time?
Yeah, good morning, Jermaine, and good morning, everybody. I've been very busy for the last 10 minutes trying to remove a halo from over my head because of the lighting in the building here. So I think I've moved myself to a position where I don't have a halo at the moment because I don't really deserve one. So I suppose, yeah, I think Emer has really outlined a lot of the key concerns and risks at the moment. And I suppose maybe just for me to reiterate a few of those, I think the closure of schools happened very suddenly in March, and it was quite clear that the majority of schools were not prepared for it or did not expect it. Also, our schools had a very inconsistent provision of technology or an ability to work remotely with students. So there was a rapid gathering of pace to try and catch up. And unfortunately, as Emer said, a lot of vulnerable students and families were left behind simply because in a lot of cases, they didn't have technology, they didn't have access to laptops, they didn't have access to iPads or phones. And again, I want to really compliment businesses because I know myself, I'm chair of a board of management, and we're very fortunate in our school to have a business partner who helped with that. And again, the help came in the form of IT expertise from the company, helping the teachers to figure out how they could connect with students. So I think businesses played a phenomenal part there, but unfortunately, due to poor Wi-Fi in some areas, due to poor connectivity, some schools were not able to deliver the service to students that they need. I think also, as Emer said, some students did disconnect. And I suppose from our perspective, we were unable to complete the work that we had started with a lot of families because once the closure came, it was impossible to do face-to-face work. There is a real concern, as Emer said, that anxiety levels could increase. And we know that we have a growing phenomenon in Ireland of students school refusing, where mental health issues are the predominant reason, where young people really find it difficult to go to school. We're also concerned that school dropout or early school leaving, which we had really battled well to I suppose, prevent in the last number of years. I mean, we are up to extremely high levels of completion at this stage. Over 94% of students complete the Leaving Cert. There is a concern that that could dip because some students may see they've been out of school so long that they really see a futility in returning. And particularly I'm thinking about students maybe who didn't enjoy school in the first place, or maybe who weren't terribly well connected. I think their concerns from a TUSLA perspective, and again, just answer the question you asked me, Jermaine, I suppose we're very much starting from a child welfare position. And our focus over the next 2 months is very much to start from that position of supporting the welfare of young people. We normally are a very targeted service. So normally we only focus on those students who have difficulties in school attendance, or students maybe who are out of school. We are reverting to a universal approach for a short period of time, simply because we anticipate that students who never needed support to go to school before are likely to need support now due to changed family circumstances, due to illnesses, and also due to concerns in the community or concerns within the family. So for a period of, we think, 6 to 8 weeks, all of our staff, homeschool liaison coordinators, school completion staff, education welfare officers, we're going to focus on supporting any student who needs guidance, advice, encouragement to return to school. And really what we want to do here is to support the return to school for all. Now, that doesn't answer the question that Emer asked as to those most vulnerable students who might miss out. So because our resources are limited, in order to provide that kind of universal support, we have to temporarily cease some of the activities that we would normally do. So our school completion program will not be running their groups as normal, because we see their energy being used to support anybody who needs to return. We will then hopefully at the end of that initial phase get back to business as normal, where we can start targeting supports at those students who need a more intensive intervention. I mean, I am concerned that in trying to do the right thing here, we may do the wrong thing, because those most vulnerable students who probably need intensive support at this stage will have to wait a little while before they get that intensive support, because I suppose as any business person will know, you have to make tough choices sometimes. And our choice, and again with the guidance of the Minister, who was very keen that we get into this universal support space for a little bit of time to ensure that nobody misses out, and then revert to the targeted space. So I suppose we really don't know what's going to happen. I mean, schools are getting ready to reopen, and in Ireland we've almost 4,000 schools, and schools are not the same. Each school has its own plan. I believe some schools are really, really well prepared, and I know I've heard really good pieces on the media where businesses have been in helping schools to get themselves ready. But in some cases, I believe schools are not ready, and I'm really fearful that the response will be inconsistent when kids go back, so that parents obviously will be looking out to ensure that their child is safe. And while schools are doing the best they can, because of the layout of schools, the size of schools, the kind of buildings they are, it's not going to be possible for schools to behave in an equitable fashion. But I believe schools will do the best they can. And I mean, obviously the restrictions announced this week have raised a lot of concerns. Parents are concerned about school transport because as workers, we've been told to avoid public transport. Yet for a lot of students, they have no choice but to use school transport or public transport to get to school. So there's an inconsistency there that is just a little bit difficult to manage. From our perspective, we know that students need to be back in school. Students need social contact. Students need to be with their teachers. They need to be with their peers. They need to be actively engaged in learning. And a break from learning, particularly, and I taught in Darndale for quite a number of years, when we returned from summer holidays with the children, you nearly had to go back to basics for a little while, because kids had forgotten a lot of what they had done beforehand. And that's simply because learning might not be the norm in the family home. So teachers are going to have to be very easy with children and pretty kind to children initially. And this is what we're advising, is that we don't get up to 100 miles an hour trying to catch up on the lost ground, because if we do that, children who are vulnerable may find it overwhelming to come back. So schools are going to have to ease children back into learning. And I think there's going to have to be a period of a few weeks when it's very much about re-establishing the routine in school, getting children used to being back in that setting, reminding children of how they have to behave under COVID rules. So it's going to be a tough time. And I mean, I really feel for school principals at the moment, because they have a lot of tough decisions to make. They will have a lot of tough questions to answer. And while the partners in the Department of Education are trying to provide as much guidance as possible, it's impossible to anticipate all of the queries that may come up. So even though there will be a frequently asked question, questions organised and answers organised, we won't think of everything. And I mean, my concerns at the moment, there are two groups of students in particular that I'm really concerned about. Those students who have a health vulnerability that will prevent them from returning to school. And the plan in relation to those students is that schools will continue to provide their education remotely. So again, that's for students who have an underlying health condition themselves. But a second group we're concerned about is where a family member has a serious health condition, that parents will rightly be concerned about sending those students back to school. And the expectation is that students who are themselves healthy should return to school. So there will be a dilemma there for some families. And yes. I believe it's going to take a little bit of time to figure out what we have to do here and to see exactly what happens when schools reopen. So Jermaine, we might need to come back in a few weeks again to have a further discussion. But I know that any school that's fortunate enough to have a business supporter, they're very, very lucky because they're getting guidance and support that they wouldn't get otherwise.
I know that's really, really, one, you paint a stark picture and the challenges that you and your team are going to face. And as you say, we'll probably be back in a few weeks to discuss further. But what you're also saying there is that the potential for support from businesses will really help. So Emer, can I go back to you for a second? We have approximately 100 business leaders here this morning. How important, in your view, is the support of businesses in Ireland? And there are thousands of employees for these students as they return to school.
I think their support is absolutely crucial. And I think it's crucial in two ways, if you like. At a more general level, I think as part of the effort to re-engage young people and children in learning, to make learning fun and relevant to their lives, they have a very important part to play. I think at primary level, initiatives like the Time to Read and Time to Count can help support that re-engagement, can kind of make learning, reading, maths games, maths applications, make them fun and make them relevant, and be part of that effort to give children extra support over the transition back to school. At post-primary level then, I think businesses and mentors can help reinforce for young people the value of educational skills and help them navigate their way through the educational system. I think a very important role of business is helping young people keep their horizons open for the future. There's, working class students, those in DESH schools, they tend to not to have the social networks that they can draw on for work placements, for transition year work placements, for Leaving Cert applied work placements, quite a narrow access to networks in a way that middle class students can, mobilize someone in a particular business to get exposure. So I think business contacts can make up some of that gap. But I think it's even more important in the context of COVID. We've seen that the groups who've lost their jobs have been disproportionately young people. They've been those in their late teens and early 20s. And I think there is a real risk that young people in more disadvantaged areas will feel a sense of futility. They will feel a sense that they're not going to get a job anyway. What's the point? So I think it's all the more important that business leaders can help them realize that actually they can position themselves to have the skills and to have the capacities and competencies that will help orientate themselves to the labour market. And they can also help make them aware of skills and directions they can take, because all young people tend to fall back on the old reliables, on what their parents are familiar with in terms of potential careers. But we know things are changing and changing rapidly, and will change again with the pandemic in terms of what we need to be able to do our work and what kinds of work is there to do. So I think that's a very important way of communicating to young people the options that are out there and that will remain out there, and with new directions developing, possibly in light of the pandemic.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I always remember Rory Quinn at one of our mentoring events when he was Minister for Education and Skills saying that whilst economic prosperity and wealth isn't evenly divided throughout the world, and in particular in Ireland, that the brains and talents are, and that this country so needs the talents and skills of all young people. So I think business, as you say, really has a role to play in demonstrating that their skills are really valued. And it's not just academic skills in any way or shape or form that will enhance the progression to a solid career. I'd like to bring in Dervla now. So Dervla, I mentioned earlier our great announcement following a number of years of work that we've made this morning, and we're going to move skills at work to second years. So, like Dervla, from your experience in Summerhill College, what's your thoughts on this? Do you think this is the right thing to do?
Good morning, Jermaine. Good morning to everybody who is logged on here this morning. I suppose I'll preface everything that I'm going to say here by firstly stating that I wholeheartedly and truly believe that the move to start operating the Skills at Work programme with second years is not only a most welcome move, but more importantly, one of the most crucial and necessary educational moves to come about in recent years. I suppose what many people outside of the educational realm may not be aware of is that for second year, this is a year that will define the rest of their school days. It's what we as teachers refer to the make or the break year for them. It's in second year that students, especially those maybe identified by the school completion programme or those participating in JCSP, they tend to lose focus, they act up. They're no longer the small, innocent first years who are eager to please and afraid to do wrong. They've established themselves in the school. They've created an identity for themselves, but that identity, unfortunately, may not always be a positive one. A lot of these students that make up the cohort of the Skills at Work programme, they may not always come from homes that offer support. They may have limited interest from their parents in terms of their educational progression. Homework may be incomplete, it may not be checked, school journals will remain unsigned for weeks on end. Important pieces of school equipment needed for art or woodwork don't appear on the day that they actually need them. All of these little things actually lead to conflict and confrontation at school for those students. These little events will over time kind of deepen their lack of interest, kind of get rid of their enthusiasm, and leave them with an indifference to education as they move on. But what we need to remember is that these are 14-year-olds, they're 13, they're 14. They're not mentally equipped, they're not mature enough, nor do they have the capacity to see beyond this. Bear in mind that maybe a 16 or a 17-year-old, a traditional TY or LCA, who was the focus of the Skills at Work programme, they're able to rise above that, they're able to get over it, their peers will lead them through, they're strong enough to kind of see that, you know, they don't have to follow the crowd. So what we now have is a situation where we have a second year who has abandoned their belief in the education system itself. School becomes the enemy. For some, it's somewhere to go to pass the time. They may want to get out of home for the day. Home may not be safe for them. It's easier to come to school and cause trouble. The more trouble they make, the faster the day goes. But for some, actually, coming to school may not even be a choice. They may want to stay at home. The more they stay at home, the more time they miss. This is a vicious circle. It's detrimental. You know, as we all know, as from a teaching point of view, second year is where the bulk of the junior cert coursework is actually covered. And the further they get behind, the more they struggle, the more they feel like a failure themselves. We also have another kind of cohort of students for the Skills at Work programme, and that might be the kids who are quite weak. They'll struggle academically wise. They might not see the worth in remaining in school once they turn 16. All they want to do is get out, they want to find a job, they want to earn money. However, I believe that by showing them the value of staying in school, by building up their skills base, and by opening their eyes to the fact that it's not as easy to get a job as they believe it is, especially in this day and age, and especially with, you know, the coronavirus and pandemic. The Skills at Work programme and their engagement in it will ultimately steer them down the path of staying in school. Furthermore, it's things like communication, presentation, and the socialisation skills afforded by the programme, along with their ability to now recognise their strengths, the confidence and the inner belief that they gain along the way from the mentors involved in the Skills at Work programme, or from the partner industry. Everybody that works there is no doubt a massive benefit to their participation and performance in their subject-based CBAs. So second year and third year, these CBAs, they count for a lot. Any of the skill set that students get and gain from the Skills at Work programme, they will be able to take that through second year and through third year. So what happens is this encourages students further when they realise that, you know what, I'm actually doing quite well at school. That CV preparation, that mock interview that I had done with my partner industry has actually stood to me when I needed to get up in class and stand in front of my teacher and do my CBA presentation.
Just for the sake of our audience, do you want to let them know what the CBA is? Some
Sorry,
are parents and they know.
CBA
Not at all.
Based assessments, so not every subject has one, as some of them do. It means that you have coursework and projects to do, like we do one in business studies, so they do a little project in second year, a project in third year, and they have to get up, give a presentation in class, then come back, write a reflection task sheet, and that counts for 10% of their overall results in my particular subject. So once students are able to transfer those skills that they've gained from Skills at Work into their actual classwork, you know, a lot of them will see their results and their grades go up maybe one or two kind of notches. And the overall outcome for their junior cert result is way beyond what they ever thought their capability actually was. And
beyond the actual, Dervla, beyond the actual results, in the wider context, how do you see the Skills at Work enhancing their skills, their mindset, their aspirations? Do you see that?
Yes, I think that they have a greater aspiration for their future. They know that things are within their grasp. They know that there is a world outside of what they ever thought in their head, what they ever may have seen at home. So I suppose, you know, the encouragement, the positive affirmation, the guidance and the new skill set provided by Skills at Work has very much a lasting impression on their life, their progression through school, but on their outcome for their future path in the world of work. And I think that all of this can only happen if we switch Skills at Work to the second year group. Get them when they're like sponges, get them when they're vulnerable, get them when they most need the help, retain them in school and show them what actually is possible for them.
Well, Dervla, that's really comforting to hear that from the coal face, and given that you're so long there teaching, I really welcome that and thank you.
You're welcome.
And Emer, from your perspective, do you think this is the right move to focus on second years as opposed to senior cycle? As Noel alluded to, Ireland is now second in student retention across Europe behind Croatia. We've really, really made the supports work, which is great news for Ireland and our young people. What's your perspective on the move? Because it's important for business to understand it.
I think it's absolutely crucial, and I think it will have a really significant impact, even more than the work with senior cycle. Dervla has captured really well how second year is very much a make or break year. We often focus on the difficulties around the transition to second level and the turbulence of settling into a new school, making new friends, having new subjects and teachers. But actually the evidence shows that once that turbulence settles down, that second year is the key year, not just for the rest of junior cycle, but well into senior cycle. So you get a kind of polarization. So you get some young people who are kind of more and more engaged in their work. They're kind of getting more difficult course material and they're responding well to that. But then you get others who are actually even spending less time on homework and study than they did in first year. We're starting to engage, and as Dervla said, a lot of the young boys from more disadvantaged backgrounds, rather than internalize that disengagement, they act out, and they get caught up then in a cycle of acting out, being reprimanded by teachers, and that kind of building up, often culminating in early school leaving, or detentions and underperformance. So really, it's key to make second year engaging and more engaging for these groups of young people. Now, junior cycle reform has taken us a good bit of the way there by valuing different skills through class-based assessments, but we still have quite an academically focused system, and that has been criticised for that. And I think that's where the skills to work can come in, because it can actually make the link between what they're doing in class, in school, and the world of work. It can make them see that some of these skills are actually relevant. It's not just about kind of learning things off and, you know, sort of being a receptacle of knowledge, that they actually have something to offer. And another aspect is that while all this kind of change and some disengagement is going on, young people are actually making decisions about potential for the rest of their lives. You know, they're choosing whether to take higher or ordinary level in Irish, English and maths. They're making choices of subjects and then into senior cycle. And often without realizing it, they've cut off potential pathways for afterwards. So if you give kind of career support and mentoring only to senior cycle groups, often, not it's too late, I mean, it's never too late for anybody, but it can be a bit late in terms of forming their view for the future. There are some pathways that are already closed to them. We find from the research that, you know, even over the transition to second level, young people are positioning themselves as to whether they're going to go on to further or higher education. They're starting to have career options. So it's a key time to actually get in there and support them to think through the skills and what possible pathways are open to them for the future. So I think all of that makes it kind of a perfect storm, that really they are at a position where they are malleable and open to kind of information, where they need more support because of the difficulties going on around that kind of middle phase of junior cycle, but also the kind of the whole negotiation of adolescent world and the social world. So I think that's a really key time, and we have found consistently that young people's experience in second level, how they engage with their teachers, how they engage with their school subjects, that influences how they settle into senior cycle, how they do in the leaving cert, and how they do up the transition to the post-school period. So I think it's really important that the evidence shows so clearly that this is the potential target group, that we really need to go with that.
Thanks, Emer. And the good news for our audience this morning is that in our pilot, pretty much all of the companies reported that they found it easier to engage with that age group actually than the older teenagers. So I think that will encourage all our companies that it may well be easier for their volunteers, because they're not teachers, they're not used to standing up in front of groups of students, or in this case we may well be hosting the virtual sessions. Noel, are you on the same page on all of this?
Absolutely, Germaine, and I don't want to bore people by going over the points that Dervla and Emer have made already, but I think the point I would make, certainly from our experience in watching trends around early school leaving, young people start to disengage in sixth class, it accelerates in first year, and the decision is often made at the end of first year, early second year. So what keeps young people in school, I think, is the question, and it's connection. It can be connection to friends, it could be connection to a vital teacher, maybe that they have a really good relationship with. And I think what Business and Skills and Work provides is an opportunity for another connection. And I think the very point you just made yourself there is, it's somebody who's not a teacher, who's not a member of staff in the school, who doesn't have any view in relation to that student. And a student might find that this is something that's meaningful for them. I think the other thing, theoretically, we can all understand why we stay in education, that it's a means to an end. A 14-year-old can't see the world like that. They see the world very short term. So I think it's about creating that physical connection that they can then see, actually, my learning is related to what I might do in the future. It also focuses on soft skills, and our education system is very weak on supporting soft skills. And when you talk to business leaders, they tell you that what they want is soft skills. They can teach the hard skills to somebody in the workplace, but if you don't have those abilities to work as a team, to communicate, to present, to problem solve, you're not really going to be very successful in the workplace. So I would see that this creates an opportunity at a critical time in a student's life to make a new connection or to see the world differently. As we've already said, and as Dervla said, second year is a bit of a drudgery. It's very academic, lots of learning, not very much distractions, and students did something different. And I think this presents an opportunity at a time when there aren't other distractions. In transition year, there's a hell of a lot going on. There are multiple activities. So you're competing in a very, very populated field. In second year, you're coming in fresh. You're probably maybe the only thing that's not academic or not school related that those kids might engage with that year. So I think you have a captive audience. I'm not in the least surprised that your evidence from the companies was that the engagement with the students was easier. I think the other thing that hasn't been mentioned that's really connected to business is we've been gradually cottoning on to the fact that we need to increase apprenticeships in Ireland, because across Europe, apprenticeships are seen as an equal opportunity. You know, they're equal with further and higher education. In Ireland, apprenticeships were seen as the poor relation. We need to change that culture where a young person now can see that a connection with business might actually point them in the direction of a career that they would like, and then their learning has to really develop and bring them to that career. So, and for a young person who might decide, I'm not doing Leaving Cert, the option will be there after Junior Cert, maybe to move to an apprenticeship and complete their learning in that route. So I think it's too late in transition year to be thinking about apprenticeships, because if a young person has decided to come back for transition year, they've more or less committed to completing the senior cycle. And we're missing out on those students who get to Junior Cert and don't make it to transition year. So I think you're capturing a more universal audience. And I think it could actually be the little golden ticket for some of those kids, maybe who are a little bit lost in second year, that this connection might be what will actually bring them further in their career.
Thank you, Noel. That's really great to hear. On apprenticeships, I'm delighted that you brought that up, because our steering group have been talking about it for the last 18 months. And this autumn, with our member network, we're going to be holding an event under an inclusive employer framework and blueprint, because many of our member companies in business in the community have embraced the new retail apprenticeship, the insurance practitioner, the pharma, and the financial. And we want to have a discussion with our members, share with them what companies are doing to progress that as a pathway that, one, their business needs, and two, young people will really find attractive. So that's great to hear you say that point. Lorraine, would you like to come in there? You said there's a question for Dervla, if you wouldn't mind putting it to her. Lorraine is my colleague who's behind the scenes making all of this happen.
Thanks, Jermaine. Yes, we have a question for Dervla. Do you think that having moved to second year students, that there is a need to come back to the students in fifth and or sixth year to provide CV skills and support with applying for college, etc.?
Most definitely. I think that maybe in second year, it's a great stage to establish that relationship and to start to build upon those skills. But the fact that Skills at Work program only lasts for 1 year, they're going to third year, they're going to be left for a year or two. And then the next stage of their life at senior cycle, it's extremely vital that we keep them interested, that as much support and help is actually given to them, because, you know, the end game of all of this is we want them to leave school, we want them to progress further, we want them to do a PLC course or go to the IT or go to a university. And for most of those, they won't be able to actually do that unless they have help with the CV preparation, with the mock interviews. And I think with the Skills program, that still is going to be, Jermaine, if I'm correct, that still is going to happen maybe later on at senior cycle. It's still an option.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a really important link that we still have between maybe their engagement and participation in second year, but also checking in again with them in a few years' time. And it also kind of helps them to think, well, do you know what? I'm doing this in second year, but if I'm aware that in 2 or 3 years' time, that if I need help, that the help is there. And at this stage, I'm confident enough now to take up that offer of help and to realise that that offer of help from anybody will actually do me a massive favour in the long run as well.
Thank you, Dervla, for that answer. I saw one of the questions, how will it work with COVID? Well, it's going to work in a virtual situation. As I mentioned, we would hope that by springtime, perhaps the site visit, which has a huge impact on the students, and it's great fun, you know, and exciting for them, and that will happen in springtime, but it will operate in a virtual setting. We're talking to teachers as to what platforms, and of course it will all be done locally. And that's where our team will come in supporting you and chatting with you and your school partner on how best will this operate for you in the school. There's one group I just want to mention, and this came out of our stakeholder meetings, and that is the principals themselves and the teachers. They're in need of huge support. And we've already moved our Management Excellence for Principals programme, which is actually open to all schools in Ireland. So in the room, you have a very rich dialogue. You have your fee-paying private schools, your debt schools, and there's a lot of sharing and learning. They're really in need of support, and we've had 2 over the summer virtual on performance management, and 1 tomorrow morning with Leia Healthcare on PR and marketing. But I would encourage you, if you've senior executives, you know, they are very busy people, but they might like to do a once-off session supporting principals or teachers. And please talk to your local business and the community representative if you're interested in that or hearing more. In the room, we have Rachel Hyland from Cornmarket, and they actually fund the total cost of Management Excellence for Principals. And they've been doing it for a decade, and it's something that the principals enormously appreciate. It's a different engagement for them, hearing from business leaders. And Rachel, I'd like to just say thank you to you and your Cornmarket colleagues and the board for their ongoing support. So that's the principles, and basically that's replicated for teachers, and we've a programme and a plan in place. But again, if your business is interested in providing a support on a topic that the school has chosen, it can be your partnering school or a cluster of schools or another school. The teachers really support it, and we're seeing things around resilience, well-being, as well as the typical team building or leadership areas. But teachers have had it very tough since March, and Dervla, my hat's off to you. You're here this morning, so bright and bubbly. You know, you're on your summer holidays, but you so have the students' needs at the heart of how you are as a person. So please do think about that. And thank you, Emer, for mentioning the importance of the literacy and numeracy. There are a number of people here this morning, and they only work with our primary school programmes. But look, perhaps this morning's panel discussion has opened your eyes to an opportunity for your staff to, we know how, we've been told it's tough at the moment working from home, and it can be the same old in terms of all these Zoom meetings. So this is an opportunity for you and your staff to consider other programmes, and please again talk to your local representative from business in the community. So look, thank you so much for your attendance this morning. I want to say a huge thanks to our panellists, particularly Noel, Emer and Dervla here this morning. I'd like to just finish up with a call to action, because this is really important. This morning is about having outcomes. So I'm looking for your help. At the moment, we have schools listed there on that slide who are without a business partner. And it's for good reason, because their previous partner had to end their involvement. Very often it's a restructuring. But perhaps your business or may have a regional site, or your suppliers or your customers are in these towns, or through your own networks, you may know somebody that you could encourage to consider getting involved. This year, above any year, the insight to the world of work is so needed. So please take that away with you. And we've 2 other fabulous opportunities in terms of supporting the needs in schools at the moment. I mentioned earlier, Basis Point have generously granted us funding to expand mentoring. It's a life-changing programme. We know many stories of impact, and we want to expand it to Dublin, Cork and Limerick. Could you give this your consideration? Perhaps taking on mentoring in senior cycle students in addition to the skills at work in second year. That would be blue sky for us and for the school. And we're seeking 5 more businesses for the Time to Count programme. So any business wishing to have more fun times, and the principals keep telling us the engagement with business in the community is about fun. So this is an opportunity for you and your staff. Please talk to your BITC regional coordinator. They'll answer your questions and provide the support. Our team will be contacting you over the next few weeks to see how best the programmes will operate for your business and in particular for your employees. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning. It's been great, it's been informative. Thank you for your long-term ongoing support of education in Ireland. As I said, I'd like in particular to thank our panellists and also Lorraine Wall for expertly organising the event, our dedicated education team who drive our mission and purpose, Maura Horgan, our head of marketing, and all my colleagues here at Business in the Community. Please steer clear of the remnants of Storm Ellen. Slán agus go nairi an bóthar libh go léir.
Thanks, Jermaine. Bye, everybody.